Hey everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Football Discussion. We like to dive into some of the hottest football debates from Reddit Soccer
Yeah.
and other communities. And you can't keep Manchester United out of the news, can you?
You can't, no.
Other day, another story.
It certainly seems that way. And today we're diving deep into the curious case of Antony, a player whose time at Manchester United has been a roller coaster ride, to say the least.
Remember all that hype when he first signed? £85 million.
Absolutely.
Man United's second most expensive transfer ever? It felt like they'd landed a global superstar.
And those early goals against Arsenal, Manchester City, and Everton only fueled the excitement. It seemed like Ten Hag had found the missing piece of his attacking puzzle.
Right.
But then things took a turn.
That's an understatement. Training cone. Doesn't do anything, flimsy leg. These are just some of the colorful descriptions I've seen from fans online. And the stats don't paint a much prettier picture either.
You're right. Only 8 Premier League goal contributions in 2.5 seasons is a pretty meager return for a player of his price tag.
Yeah.
And when you consider he's got more bookings than goals and assists, it starts to raise some serious questions about his effectiveness in the Premier League.
So what happened? Was this a case of the infamous United tax? Clubs slapping a premium on players simply because they know?
The United tax is definitely a real phenomenon.
Manchester United is desperate to make a splash.
It's almost like there's this unwritten rule that if you're selling to Manchester United, you'd automatically add a few million to the price. But even accounting for that £85 million for a player with Antony's track record at Ajax seemed like a gamble from the start.
So if we set aside the inflated price for a moment, what about Antony's actual performance on the pitch? Some fans argue that he was simply misused at United, played out of position, didn't get enough support.
There might be something to the tactical fit argument. I mean, we've seen plenty of examples of talented players struggling when they're not deployed in their best position. But even if we acknowledge that, I think Antony's limitations go beyond just where he was positioned on the pitch.
What are you seeing as his biggest weaknesses then? What specifically made him such a poor fit for the Premier League?
There are a few things that stand out. First, his heavy reliance on his left foot makes him predictable.
Okay.
Premier League defenders quickly figured out that they could force him onto his weaker side and effectively neutralize him. Second, his decision-making in the final third often leaves a lot to be desired. He tends to hold onto the ball too long, misses passing opportunities, and his final ball often lacks precision.
And those weaknesses weren't apparent when he was at Ajax.
They were there, but perhaps not as pronounced.
Okay.
The Eredivisie is a different beast altogether. The pace is slower.
Right.
The defending isn't as intense. It's possible that Antony's style of play, which relies heavily on flair and trickery, was simply better suited to the Dutch league.
It almost feels like those early goals against top teams created this illusion of Premier League readiness that just wasn't there. And it's interesting because even Ten Hag, who managed him at Ajax and presumably knew his strengths and weaknesses better than anyone,
That's right.
couldn't unlock his potential at United.
And if Ten Hag, who has a reputation for developing young players, couldn't get the best out of him,
Right.
it raises questions about whether any manager could have. You have to wonder if at the end of the day, Antony just wasn't cut out for the Premier League's intensity and physicality.
Which brings us to the big news. Antony is now on loan to Real Betis until June 2025 with no buy option. And Betis covering 84% of his £200,000 weekly wages. What does this move tell us about how Manchester United view him now?
It looks like they're essentially cutting their losses. The fact that there's no buy option suggests that United have little faith in Antony's ability to turn things around and potentially recoup even a fraction of their massive investment. It's a stark contrast to the excitement and optimism that surrounded his arrival just a couple of seasons ago.
So is this loan move a chance for Antony to hit the reset button? Maybe find his form in La Liga?
That's a great question, and one that only time will answer. On the one hand, a change of scenery could be beneficial for Antony. Maybe La Liga's more technical, less physical style will be a better fit for his skill set. Maybe the pressure of that massive price tag was weighing him down.
Yeah.
And now, away from the Old Trafford spotlight, he can play with more freedom.
But let's be honest. It's a loan deal with no buy option. It feels like Manchester United are just trying to minimize their losses and hope he rediscovers some of that spark that made him such a hot prospect in the first place.
That's the pragmatic view, and probably the most likely scenario. However, let's not forget that stranger things have happened in football.
Right.
Maybe Antony will thrive in La Liga, reignite his career, and make Manchester United regret their decision. It would be quite the redemption arc.
It would indeed. But for now, he joins a growing list of cautionary tales, big money signings who failed to deliver on their promise in the Premier League. And his case raises some fascinating questions about Manchester United's transfer strategy and their ability to compete at the highest level.
And speaking of other big money flops, let's take a look at some other examples and see if we can glean any insights into what went wrong with those transfers and how Antony's situation compares. When we talk about big money flops, Romelu Lukaku's name has to be right up there. Chelsea shelled out a club record £97.5 million, hoping he'd be the final piece of their attacking puzzle.
That's even more than what United paid for Antony. What was the thinking behind that transfer? Did Chelsea believe Lukaku was the missing link to a Premier League title?
There's no doubt Chelsea saw him as the solution to their goal-scoring woes. He was coming off a stellar season with Inter Milan, leading them to a Serie A title.
Right.
But sometimes a player's success in one league doesn't necessarily translate to another.
And in Lukaku's case, that seems to be exactly what happened. It's not like he completely flopped. But 8 Premier League goals for that price tag is definitely a disappointing return.
Exactly. It goes to show that even proven goal scorers can struggle to adapt to different systems.
Right.
And the unique demands of the Premier League.
It makes you wonder if clubs are sometimes blinded by the hype
Absolutely.
and end up overpaying for players based on reputation, rather than a thorough analysis of whether they're truly a good fit.
You have to consider the player's style of play, their personality, how they might mesh with the existing squad, and even the manager's tactical approach.
Yeah.
There are so many factors that go into a successful transfer.
Another high-profile transfer that comes to mind is Tanguy Ndombele to Tottenham. Didn't they break their transfer record to bring him in from Lyon?
They did a whopping £55 million. And unfortunately for Tottenham fans, he became another cautionary tale of a big money move gone wrong.
What factors contributed to Ndombele's struggles at Tottenham? Was it fitness issues, tactical incompatibility, or something else altogether?
It seems like a combination of things. There were reports of fitness issues and struggles to impress to the Premier League's intensity. And then there were the rumored clashes with Jose Mourinho, who was the manager at the time. It's a classic example of how a player's talent alone isn't always enough to guarantee success.
You need the right environment, the right system, and even the right personality fit with the manager and teammates.
Precisely. And speaking of big money signings that didn't quite pan out, how can we forget Nicolas Pepe at Arsenal?
Oh, yes. £72 million, if I remember correctly. And while he had his moments, he never really lived up to that hefty price tag.
Right. He showed flashes of brilliance, but lacked consistency.
Okay.
And similar to Antony, he struggled to adapt to the physicality and pace of the Premier League.
It's interesting that you bring up the physicality of the league. Do you think that's a common thread in many of these big money flops?
I think that's a very valid point.
Are clubs overlooking that aspect when they scout players from other leagues?
The Premier League is incredibly demanding physically, and players who haven't experienced that level of intensity can struggle to cope. It's not just about size and strength. It's about the relentless pressing, the constant physical battles. And that can take a toll on players, especially those coming from leagues where the style of play is more technical and less direct.
So are we seeing a pattern here? Are clubs, particularly Manchester United, just throwing money at problems hoping something sticks?
It's easy to criticize in hindsight, but there does seem to be a lack of a clear, cohesive strategy when it comes to recruitment. They haven't been great at identifying players who are the right fit for the team and the league.
And that brings us back to Antony. Is there any chance he could turn things around at Real Betis? Maybe La Liga's style of play is more suited to his strengths?
It's certainly possible. La Liga is known for its more technical, less physical style of play, and maybe away from the intense scrutiny and pressure of playing for Manchester United, Antony can rediscover his form and confidence. But it's worth noting that Real Betis isn't exactly a European powerhouse. They're a solid mid-table La Liga team, and if Antony couldn't make his mark at Manchester United, you have to wonder if he can elevate his game enough to make a real impact at Betis.
I guess we'll have to wait and see. But it feels like this loan move is more about damage control for Manchester United. A chance to get Antony off the books.
Yeah.
And minimize their financial losses.
It's hard to argue with that assessment. And it begs the question, what does this all mean for Manchester United moving forward?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It's about more than just one player. The Antony saga and the other failed transfers we've discussed point to some deeper issues within the club's structure and decision-making processes. It's almost like there's this disconnect, between the ambition of the club, they want to be back at the top winning trophies,
Right.
and the reality of their decision-making. They're still paying the price for past missteps.
Exactly. There seems to be this lingering effect of what we talked about earlier
Yeah.
with United Tech. It's as if that inflated transfer fee for Antony and other players like him
Right.
created this pressure for him to perform at a level that was maybe unrealistic.
And when those expectations aren't met, it's the player who gets blamed, even if the club might share some responsibility for setting them up for failure.
It's a complex dynamic, and it makes you wonder, what is the long-term solution for Manchester United?
Yeah.
How do they break free from this cycle of overpaying for players and then not integrating them effectively?
Well, they've got a new manager now, Ruben Amorim. Maybe he's the answer.
Yeah.
He did wonders with Sporting Lisbon, turning them into a title-winning team.
Amorim's track record is definitely impressive. He's known for his tactical acumen,
Right.
his ability to develop young players, and his knack for getting the best out of limited resources. But even with his talent,
Yeah.
it's a tough task to turn things around at a club like Manchester United.
What are the biggest challenges he faces? Is it simply about changing the recruitment strategy, or is there something deeper at play?
It's multifaceted, really. First, he needs to instill a clear identity on the pitch,
Okay.
a style of play that suits the players he has and allows them to be successful. He needs to build a cohesive unit, not just a collection of expensive individuals.
It's about creating a system where the sum is greater than its parts, right?
Exactly.
Where players understand their roles,
Yeah.
work together seamlessly, and are all pulling in the same direction.
And secondly, he needs to address the culture within the club. There have been reports of dressing room unrest, a lack of leadership, and a sense of entitlement among some players.
That doesn't sound like a recipe for success. How do you change a culture like that? Is it about bringing in the right kind of players, or is it something that needs to come from the top down?
It's probably a bit of both. You need leaders on the pitch who set the right example, but you also need strong leadership from the manager and the boardroom. They need to create a culture of accountability
Right.
where everyone is striving for excellence
Right.
and no one is allowed to coast on past achievement.
It's a tall order, but if Amorim can achieve it, he could transform Manchester United back into the force they once were. But let's be realistic, it's not going to happen overnight.
You're absolutely right. It's a long-term project, and it's going to take patience, smart decisions, and a bit of luck along the way.
This Antony saga has been fascinating to unpack. It's more than just a story about one player. It's a microcosm of the challenges facing Manchester United
Yeah.
as they try to regain their place at the pinnacle of English football.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It highlights the complexities of modern football, the financial pressures, the intense media scrutiny, the importance of smart recruitment,
Yeah.
and the need for a strong, coherent vision for the future.
It's a reminder that success isn't just about spending big money. It's about making smart decisions, building a cohesive team, and fostering a culture that breeds winners.
And for Manchester United fans,
Yeah.
the question remains, can their new manager guide them back to the glory days? Only time will tell,
Right.
but the journey will be fascinating to watch.
Well, there you have it, folks. The Antony saga, a tale of unfulfilled potential, a hefty financial hit for Manchester United, and a window into the challenges of building a winning team in the modern game. We hope you're finding this analysis insightful. We're growing every day, thank you. If you are to quick like and share, it would be greatly appreciated. It helps other football fans find this content too.